October 31st, 2024, I read The City of Dreaming books, which is about, I believe it's Dance-A-Lot Word Spinner. Sorry, Dance-A-Lot Yarn Spinner. I don't remember if it's Dance-A-Lot or if the main character is his son. Not son. Is it son or grandson or is it nephew? I don't remember. But anyway, the yarn spinner, Optimus yarn spinner. Optimus goes to the City of Dreaming books in hopes of getting a poem that he's obsessed with published. And the first person that he shows it to sets off like this entire chain of events that just goes crazy from there. I do enjoy the book, and that was my second time, I think, reading the book. It is a lot more difficult reading it out loud than it is reading it to yourself, because there are so many tongue twisters all throughout it. It's still a very enjoyable book. LMNOP, A Novel in Letters, is just a fantastic book, and I've read it a few times, and that was my first time reading it, October. Well, here, I guess maybe that's I guess maybe I started reading it in September 2024, and then I finished reading it in October 2024. That doesn't seem right to me. Maybe I added, like, when I read it later on or something, because sometimes I'm late to update. But it's still a fantastic book, and it's just a very fun book, like seeing all the challenges that they're faced with. It's funny, but it's also a scary book in a way because of the increasing dangers of the repercussions of disobeying the laws that surround forming sentences that contain the outlawed letters of the alphabet. Stories for the nighttime and some for the day. I did enjoy reading that, but I don't really remember how long it took me. I think it took me like so many hours. I think I read it within a day or something. I'm not sure. Wind, Sand, and Stars by Saint-Exupéry. Sorry, Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. It's written oddly there. It was fascinating, but at the same time, it's also kind of infuriating in a way when you realize how little he mentions his wife Consuelo in his autobiographical thing, and just to realize how much she was just driven crazy by the fact that he was putting himself in so much danger, and yet he was like totally addicted to it. So when you kind of have that in mind, it makes it harder to read Wind, Sand, and Stars, but at the same time, I still have a lot of respect for all that he and the other like pilots of that time were doing. The Unbearable Lightness of Being. I love the book, but it's not a fun read. It really isn't, and I don't really look forward to reading that ever again on stream. because there are parts of it that still are hard to be objective about and hard to not be upset by. Jennifer, even though I still think it's a fantastic book, I've read it a few times. It's always upsetting in places. Jennifer Government by Max Berry. I absolutely love that book, and I would gladly read that again and again. And I have read it several times, but that was my first time reading it on stream. It's one of my favorite books. Although actually, a lot of these books are either they are a favorite book of mine, or they are a book that I found just enjoyable, and I just wanted to share them with all of you. The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime. I don't remember if I enjoyed reading that one out loud or not. I don't like reading large numbers at all. Like, my learning disability has to do with math and numbers. So whenever he mentions some sort of mathematical thing, it's like I just kind of want to tune out of it. And I don't enjoy reading numbers, like large numbers. But for the most part, I do enjoy The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime. I just don't like the mathematical aspects of it, especially when reading it aloud. Hallam Foe, I don't remember how long it actually took me to read that out loud, but it's just a wonderful book, and it's just so fascinating in so many ways. Happy Face, I love so much. It's just such an emotionally deep story, and just a well written story, like coming of age story. It's just fantastic. Misunderstanding was not as fun reading it aloud as it has been reading it to myself in the past. Oddly, because I actually I love Misunderstanding. I've read it several times, but I wouldn't really say it was as fun reading it aloud, honestly. There are parts that feel taboo to read out loud, that make it kind of awkward. Tilt is the book that when I read it out loud, I thought I had remembered really enjoying reading it, but then as I was reading it out loud, I realized how much of it I did not agree with, and I actually was so upset by it, I destroyed the book eventually. After I read it, I was like, I don't need this in my life, I don't need this, and I don't want to actually pass this book down. I just ended up ripping it up, because it was there were just too many things about Tilt that I was bothered by. Matilda Savage, I love that book. It's not as fun to read it aloud as it is to read to yourself. There are some parts that I feel like they are realistic, but at the same time, they carry a kind of presenting the facts without employing any sort of judgment, which is good for a writer to do, but at the same time, reading it aloud, you have some immature people who will take a line and turn it into a joke when it's not actually supposed to be a joke, and that was not very fun. So, because it actually made something that was supposed to not be misconstrued that way, it just did this weird thing to it. So, like, I didn't like that aspect of reading that one out loud. And I probably won't read it aloud in the future to avoid that kind of thing happening again. Unfortunately, even though I love that book. Machine Man. I love the book Machine Man. I've read it several times to myself, but reading it aloud was very fun. I don't know if I really feel like reading these again anytime soon, honestly. If ever again, because some of these, it's like when you have read them so soon, it just kind of feels pointless to read them again if you've read them in the past 2 or 3 years. So, Timothy, or Notes of an Abject Reptile. It's a fantastic book, but it's also kind of tedious in a way to read out loud. Even though I do enjoy the book, and I feel like it's a very beautifully written book, which has a lot of sadness to it. Once Upon a Broken Heart, it was okay to read aloud, but honestly I feel like a lot of the books in the Caraval series, as well as the spin-offs, are not really as fun to read a second time. And I felt that way a little bit less with Once Upon a Broken Heart, but I definitely felt that way with Legendary and Finale. Like, I didn't enjoy reading those a second time. It was actually pretty infuriating to read a second time. The Diamond of Darkhold was okay to read a second time. It's alright. It's not my favorite of the books of Ember. The Prophet of Yonwood was also okay to read out loud. I do think they're fantastic books, but the last two, again, are not my favorite of the City of Ember books. The People of Sparks, I loved reading that. That one is one of my favorite of the City of Ember books. The City of Ember, very fun to read out loud, and it's just a wonderful book. I Am the Ice Worm. I don't remember how it was reading it aloud, if that was enjoyable to read aloud or if it was tedious to read aloud. Our Only May Amelia was actually more upsetting than I remembered it being to read aloud, I think, if I remember correctly, but still it was a very tactful book in the way that it handled grief. Still very hard to read emotionally. Catherine Called Birdie. I've always loved that book. It's very fun to read aloud. The Midwife's Apprentice, fun to read aloud. Also kind of, tedious in places, but still a fantastic book overall. Terrible Times, Eddie Dickens Trilogy, number 3, was a fun book to read aloud. Dreadful Acts, fun to read aloud. House Called Awful Inn, fun to read aloud. finale, Caraval, not fun at all to read aloud. Because there are things that when you know in advance, it makes certain important moments of the book feel absolutely pointless. And you feel irritated with certain characters for things that they do or don't do, or say or don't say, that could have resolved everything so fast. And it makes reading it a second time just a miserable thing. So while I do love that book, and I love the Caraval series, the last two books of the Caraval series are just not fun the second time around. They're great the first time around, but when you read it a second time, it's just miserable. That's all I can say about it. The Gift by Vladimir Nabokov. I will probably be reading all of the Vladimir Nabokov books all over again. I would do so gladly. Those were the most important books for me to be reading aloud. His books are my favorites. Like, he's my favorite author. I love his way of phrasing things. I love his prose. I just love everything about his books. Even when they're heavy, they're still just fantastic. Anyway, The Gift, I loved reading all of Nabokov's books. And I read that in December 18th, 2023, aloud. And again, these were not the first times, none of these were my first time reading these books. Some of them are my favorites. Nabokov ones, especially favorites. Delusion Defense, I love reading that out loud. I think, unless I was... No, I think I did. I think I loved reading that. The Eye by Vladimir Nabokov. I love that book so much. I enjoyed reading it. King, Queen, Knave is also... I mean, it's always a little bit annoying in places, but at the same time, it's still enjoyable to read. Legendary, Caraval Book 2. Not fun to read aloud the second time. Caraval, fun to read the second time. Out loud. Very fun. I love Caraval. I feel like it's probably, in many ways, the best one of the Caraval books. Even though, actually, I do really love Legendary. I just feel like the last two books are really annoying to read a second time. The Night Circus was not as fun to read aloud as I thought it would be. And I read it a few times before, but still somehow it's just like it was so much more emotionally intense and heavy than I remembered it being, and I did not really enjoy reading it out loud. The Illustrated Man by Ray Bradbury, always fun to read out loud. I love the stories in it. The 50-Year Sword, always challenging to read out loud, but very fun. The House of Seven Gables, very tedious to read out loud, but still just a beautiful book and still wonderful. The Monkey's Paw, fun to read out loud, very short, but still a great story. Short story. The Shadow of the Wind, I think I remember this one being very tedious to read out loud, even though I really love the book and I've read it several times. I think I tried to read The Angel's Game out loud, and I was not enjoying trying to read The Angel's Game out loud at all, and I just had to stop. But I do love the Cemetery of Forgotten Books. I highly recommend the rest of the Cemetery of Forgotten Books. They're so emotionally heavy. I don't feel like I can read them out loud, even though I love them. The original of Laura is actually hilarious to read out loud. It's very dark and twisted, but I find it humorous in many ways, and there are so many references throughout the original of Laura to other Nabokov stories and books, and the plots and the other characters of so many of his books throughout his bibliography, that it's just so enjoyable if you're a fan of Nabokov. Really fun to read aloud. James Clavell's The Children's Story is really heavy, but still very important, and I found it not too difficult to read out loud and worth it. How It Ends by Laura Weiss. I've read it several times. It never really gets easier to read in certain places. It's a very beautifully written book, but it's very heavy, and it's not really fun to read out loud, honestly. But it was worth it, and it was important. Pigtopia. That doesn't mean I don't love it. Because I love it so much, I've read it several times, but not fun to read out loud. Pigtopia, Kitty Fitzgerald, not fun at all to read out loud, very difficult to read out loud, but still very clever and still very fun in the challenging aspect of it, but it's just so emotionally heavy that it makes it really painful to read. So not the funnest to read out loud. Still a very important, very good book. I love it, but it's just really heavy. Pale Fire, always fun to read. Always fun to read out loud. It does have some heaviness to it, but it's also very just beautiful. I love Pale Fire. Ben Sinister was actually not as painful as I thought it would be to read out loud, because I thought I remembered a certain scene playing out in a much, much worse way. And so it was there is some horror to it, but it's actually not as extremely horrific as I remembered it being, and I will probably eventually read it again at some point. Because it's important. Laughter in the Dark by Vladimir Nabokov. Very emotionally heavy in places, very intense. There is some dark comedy to it, but it's still just a very fantastically written book. The story is very gripping. It was a great book to read. Just in places very painful, because it gets very emotionally intense and stressful to read, but I appreciate it. Glory by Vladimir Nabokov. The first time I read it, it was very tedious, and I couldn't get into it, but it was alright to read out loud. It was not that bad to read out loud. If I remember correctly, pretty fun. Mary by Vladimir Nabokov. Very fun to read out loud. I loved it. The Gift by Vladimir Nabokov. I enjoyed reading that out loud. Despair by Vladimir Nabokov. I enjoyed reading that out loud. I think it's a fantastic book. I really love it. The Eye by Vladimir Nabokov. I enjoyed reading that one out loud. It's one of my favorite books by him, and it's just fantastic. I just love The Eye. Invitation to a Beheading by Vladimir Nabokov. I love that book so much. It's just so wild in so many ways, and it's just so imaginative, and the humor is just crazy. I love that book, so it was very fun to read out loud. The 13.5 Lives of Captain Bluebear was a lot more strenuous for me to read out loud than probably anything that I read out loud. I think that one took me like 13 hours or so, something like that, to read out loud. It was like, I read to the point, like, I think that I was hoarse. I think that was the one where I had to stop and like allow certain breaks in reading where I was not saying anything and I was just like mute for an hour or something like that before I could continue. It was crazy. So that one, as funny as it is, as wonderful as it is, I love the book. It's full of tongue twisters, but due to the sheer volume of it, it's definitely not easy to read out loud. Very challenging to read out loud. If I ever read that one out loud again, I would probably have to designate specific breaks in it. I couldn't just do it all in one a second time, reading it out loud. Still very enjoyable overall with the story. I always loved the book, but not the best fun to read out loud. Very painful to read out loud just physically. Panine. Very fun to read out loud. I love that book. And I also read The Printer at one point out loud, and that was mostly fun to read out loud. It wasn't that hard to read out loud because it's my own book. I know I've also read some of my other books before on stream, but that is where it ends on this list for the books that I read out loud on the other channel. Somehow, and I don't know why, the Dictionary of Gypsy Mythology is not on this list. It probably wasn't on Goodreads. Otherwise it would be on this list. But that was one of the most enjoyable to read out loud. I remember just laughing so hard I was just like incapable of like standing up to even read it. It was like, I laughed so hard reading the book. I was like doubled over. So I would have to say that was probably one of the most enjoyable books to read. Very fun. But also very crazy. Anyway, those are all the books that I read. And I hope to maybe reread some of them again sometime, but it just feels way too soon to be rereading them, and they are all books that I love, and some of them absolute favorites, and I'm glad that I was able to share them with you, and I hope that maybe in the future I can share them again in full the way that I did back then in 2023 and in 2024. Maybe through live stream again, or like this and just read it directly and then post it. Thank you to anyone who ever listened to me reading those books. It meant a lot to me reading them, and sharing them, because these are some of the books that have meant so much to me that I wanted other people to hear them too or read them too. And I know that some books are not widely available everywhere. So I wanted to entertain you all, and maybe in the future I can reread them all slowly. But I think the next books I read will probably be even more books that I have also loved and enjoyed, before I go back around to the books I've already read out loud in live streams. Although I'm not sure when I'll feel ready to do that. I gave up on reading The Frenchman's Creek by Daphne du Maurier because I was just not in a good emotional state or emotional place to be reading it, and I still don't feel ready to try reading that again. It just really wasn't that fun, honestly, to read that aloud. And even though I did enjoy reading it the first time, and I don't really know when I will feel up to reading more books and live streams, but I hope to soon.